And I believe we are live. It says we're live. That awkward time.
Am I supposed to say got it?
You can say got it. Yes, you absolutely can. And we will allow some people
I've never seen that before.
Yes, it says we are live, and we are live. We are so excited once again to be here on this Thursday morning, afternoon, evening on the Estill voice training page with our Estill experts, Judith Dunlore and Brian Winnie, both Estill mentor and course instructors from two very different places. But this is a reoccurring series that last month we had Carrie Tellis and Joanna Lott, who are EMCIs, specialists in speech language pathology. And now we have two voice experts, but also choral and classical experts. And then next month, we will be hosting a professional speaking voice Ask the Estill expert session. I will introduce our Estill administrative assistant and Estill master trainer candidate, Carter Ellis, who's going to take the questioning, not about his certification journey. It's about Judith and Brian. So I will turn it over to him. Carter, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Luke. Yes, like Luke was saying, I am the administrative assistant for Estill Voice International, and I am on my way to becoming an EMT, slowly working up that ladder. And I have the privilege of hosting these two beautiful experts today, focusing on some choral and classic music. So without further ado, let's delve into some bio. So first we have Brian Winnie to my right. I don't know where he is on your screen, but he's the director of choral activities at Western Illinois University. And hello, Brian. You can say hi if you'd like to.
Hello, good to be here. Thank you, Howard.
Yeah, amazing. And then, of course, the illustrious Judith Dunmore, the EMCI with testing privileges. Judith is pretty much a jack of all trades. We were talking about this before we hopped on a second ago. She's a performer, musical director, teacher. She's performed internationally. She has taught at the collegiate level at many universities. So Judith, you want to say hi?
Hello, I'm delighted to be here, and it's always so exciting to connect with the rest of the country at 9:30 in the morning with my cup of coffee.
Yes, that good California time, everyone. Okay, so first things first, I would love to know, I told you this a second ago, I would love to know, both of you, your process of coming to Estill voice training, and then your process of becoming an EMCI. So whoever would like to take that first. Judith, why don't you get us started?
Okay, well, in 2002, I had already been teaching voice for quite a few years with very good singers. I was very proud of my singers, but I didn't feel like I was servicing my musical theater students very well. They weren't getting into the schools that I would have liked to have seen them get into. So there was a seminar, or there was a NATS convention in New York in 2002 that was on the belt voice. And so I got myself there, and that's where I met Jo Estill. And it only took me about 15 minutes into her presentation to realize that what she had to say was a scope far beyond a way to belt. And so I got myself, and it was difficult because right at that time there weren't a lot of workshops offered. So I had to be persistent. Got myself into my first workshop, and I was lucky to be with Jo Estill for my first workshop. And that was the beginning of my certification journey, because I wanted to get it, and it was an incredible process. And when I took that workshop, I was able to get students into really good theater schools. I was able to solve some of the problems that I had had with my voice that I'd never been able to answer. And I couldn't believe the speed that I could accomplish things with my students. Because, for example, the good full classical sound, it would usually take me about 3 years of working with them and developing them to get that consistent full sound. Once I had Estill, it took the time of teaching them the different figures, having them understand them and be able to do them. Once they could do that, we could get into that classical, beautiful full sound. And it was just amazing.
Wow, that's awesome. What, just to ask a follow-up question here, because I'm curious, what was one of your like biggest ahas for coming to Estill? Obviously, the whole system I think is amazing, but was there anything in particular that you found like superiorly useful in your transition into Estill that you were like, oh, without this, none of it could have happened?
Well, my aha was just, I just need to know what this woman knows.
All right.
That was my aha. I think much of what Estill was a way of explaining many things I was already doing.
Mm.
So it was saying, oh, that's what's happening to make that happen. That's what's happening to make that happen. But I think the biggest aha for me was the thin folds, that there were different body covers. And what I had been trying to do with air control really needed to be done with the position of our vocal, the body cover, the mass that we had decided to use. And so then I could finally sing softly in a higher range, which I never ever could do in tune before. And so that was the new point. And the other was the false folds. It's like I had been working to try to have that accomplished. You know, I would get my singers to do that in various ways that my voice teachers had gotten with me. But when I finally found out what it was, what muscle it was and where it was, and that she showed the false folds, and I said, that's Jennifer, that's Wayne, and there was one other student I forget, but I know Jennifer and Wayne, I've been working with so hard to try to get that freedom in their throat. I knew exactly where it was, but I couldn't reach it for them. As soon as I found out we had to laugh, it worked just fine. You know, so that particular presentation, that moment was definitely an aha.
I bet. Wow, that's very interesting. Okay, Brian, over to you. What your process of coming to Estill, and then your process of furthering that education to becoming EMCI?
Yeah, so it's actually very serendipitous that I'm here with Judith because she was a huge part of the start of my process. And that was when I was back in Washington. So I came upon Jo's work when I was starting my first year of doctoral research at the University of Washington, and I came across her study, her 1988 study on the physiological differences between belt and classical voice. And so much like Judith, it was coming. I went to study to get a doctoral degree in choral conducting because I felt like I had holes. I was missing this aspect of how we teach the voice within the choral context. And I very much am interested in the versatility of the voice within that particular context. And so when I saw that study, I had no idea who Jo was. I had no idea what her research was. It then led me to realize that there's a model of teaching within it that led me to Vancouver. And that's where I met Judith when she was running courses up there, the first couple that I had taken. And then it was through the dissertation process that continued and eventually led to desiring to get to the EMT certification so that I could run courses for choirs within the context I was teaching at higher education. And then eventually, with the continued push and support of Kim, Dr. Steinhauer, the president, then I decided, okay, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to see what we can do to really codify a pedagogy of Estill usage within the choral context, which is really what I've been doing for a little bit now. And I think my aha, to dovetail, was similar to Judith's in that I was when I left with the first couple of courses, I recall AES narrowing for me was like because where I'm from in, as we call Pennsylvania sometimes, Northeast Pennsylvania, there's a lot of narrowing, and that kind of sound quality was something I was used to, but I didn't know what necessarily could be causing that. And so I've had to take time to get that not to be my only attractor state in my own singing and speech. But from there, it really was understanding that all that we want to accomplish with expressivity and intonation within ensemble singing, period, harmony, is really about the structural changes that we need to understand need to occur in order for that to happen. Just like Judith was saying, instead of just thinking that it's only the breath component perhaps that we would go to first for such changes. And that really revolutionized the way that I was thinking about teaching those concepts in an ensemble setting.
Nice. Oh, that's amazing. I feel like every person coming to Estill, everyone has those aha moments, and I'm always so curious to hear, especially people with EMCI, specifically the experts, what that was and how that's kind of carried through. Okay, what I would love to ask you both is, you both have choral and music direction experience. I would love to know what Estillian principles you think are like most valuable in ensemble singing, and like and to dive even deeper, like blending, like what is it? Because I know, Judith, you have done like music directed many musical theater shows, as well as you do some caroling for like choral singing, things like that. Like what would you say are the biggest things that can really take a choir from, or an ensemble from here to the next level using the Estill principles? Whoever wants to go first.
I think
I'm happy to
that
go
you
first.
made.
Go
Go
for it,
first, Ryan. You go first. I
So,
did it last time.
it's been, I think this is so contextually driven, so I'm sure there are things that we're going to say that are very similar, but it really is starting from your context of what the singers have experienced with, either through their age or through their previous training, and also the cultural obligations that they're surrounded with, right? But I think, from my sense, it's been a huge growth spurt right away with any group if you can understand that there needs to be a similar ideal that we're going for within each voice part. So if it's a 4-part divisi, we need to have each of those parts have a similar matching of quality and ideals within that particular part. And then when you're trying to fill out a harmony, we have to understand that since the voice already produces all of the harmonics of the voice that are being highlighted at any given moment, that it's our job to help the voices that are within that harmonic series kind of be highlighted or less highlighted within that whole context. So if we're going after similar quality choices within each divisi part, then we might have slight alterations, but they're all from the same family, right? So we might be in one particular type of recipe if we're thinking of it in Estill terms here, but we might have slight variations from each group, so that the sopranos aren't outshining on a particular thing when it's needed to have the tenor have their moment on melody or blend or balance. And from that perspective, as Judith was just saying so eloquently about being able to sing thin folds up high and be in tune, there are other ways to help our singers feel more productive and do quality choices that are sustainable in Estill, that promote sustainability and vocal health for those singers who may otherwise get fatigued when we don't go after blend and balance in the same type of way.
Nice. Judith, over to you.
Well, I think that pretty well covered it, but it's just the fun. If you want a really wonderful blend, that you want to make the same quality choices, that they had the same recipe, but you're going to notice that we had a lot of fun experimenting with having, a number of parts, the background section of the choir in their stiff folds, and have something else in the thicker or the thin or the more twang in it, and just experimenting with the recipes to add the color within it. And sometimes that ended up being quite a bit of fun too. And it is so wonderful to have, I started Estill after I had been doing most of my choral work, but with some of the groups, it is so fun when everybody knows the signals. You have such a dynamic control of your ensemble. I remember I had one student whose just gone to college now. And he came back and he said, they were talking about they wanted a black sound or a gray sound. And I was trying to figure out if it was a black sound or a gray sound. And when they finally explained to me, I thought, well, why didn't they just say a thick fold or a stiff fold?
I have definitely experienced that with people with auditions or from different ensembles I've been in, and they've described it, through colors and through metaphors. And I'm always in my mind having to do the Estill translation, being like, okay, what are they asking me to do? What does that mean for me? Judith, you mentioned hand signals, and we actually got a question from the chat that David asked, do you use the Estill hand signals when you are conducting a choir? And do you find that complicated when you're conducting? So Judith, you said you do.
Except that, yeah, but I don't have, as I say, for the last 10 years, I haven't had quite, I have one foot into retirement right now. So many of the things that I've done, I'm not doing. Why don't you ask Brian?
Totally.
Because he's used it more frequently.
Yeah, so to answer that, it's a great question, David. The things that I'm interested in doing is definitely using the hand signals, but also incorporating gesture ideals in particular to the way the sound is being produced. And one of the reasons this is a little offshoot that I went to the University of Washington was the great work that Jeffrey Boers, my mentor, does with his kind of relationship naturally of sound and gesture and meeting those ideals, because we know through research that it suggests that if we use gesture, it helps us learn things that are really complicated in a less complicated way. So not only do we use the hand signals, but we use them with consistency of movement so that they're really going after the ideal. So for instance, if we're thinking about thyroid cartilage tilting, we can continue that slight movement of tilt, which isn't probably showcasing itself well on Zoom, but our students can do that in the same exact sustained quality we do, so that they can feel what the changes are vocally. And it's a gesture ploy that's really, really beneficial. And if you're thinking about it from the perspective of adding these hand signals into our already typical conducting gesture, we can certainly, I think, incorporate some of them very, very easily. If we're doing independent, for instance, left hand, we can have one pattern going in a sustained manner while this is doing some narrowing or thickening, thinning. That's really easy to showcase and something that's really in our gesture already. So some of those gestures incorporate themselves really easily.
That's amazing. I would have killed to have a choir director like that. Luke.
I have a question actually, and it's about notation essentially, Brian, that you've been working on essentially how you would label your music. I think as a lot of singers, especially in choirs or even in private lessons, how do you help people incorporate the Estill options, figure options, and qualities into their notation?
Yeah, so with the collaboration of Mary McDonald Klimek, the former vice president of Estill, we kind of worked toward an Estill phonetic alphabet, for lack of a better title for that. And some of it is easy to incorporate, and we also have the ability, like I use a lot of Laban in work that I do in terms of kind of taking Laban, adding the anatomical approach of how Laban works. It's a dance analysis, right? Movement analysis, and how Estill's stuff can be similar. And so we utilize those types of sustainments and efforts and whatnot to describe for conducting and students analysis of their scores, to be able to notate them, the feel of the move, not just the move itself. And it can get pretty wonderful, because the students themselves are thinking through ways to crescendo in what parts of the measure in between all the beats in one particular structure, with how much effort, if we're using effort scales like Estill, with effort scales of gesture as a conductor too. So there's a lot of common ground between the two approaches to enhance our analysis.
I have a question. Brian has been so brilliant with incorporating the gestures and the choral patterns, but I'm wondering, have you ever experimented with having the singers do the hand signals with it? Because that kinesthetic path is one of our paths of learning, and so not they wouldn't just see the visual, but they would also start having the kinesthetic message. Have you ever experimented with that?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that like for instance, singers, when we're doing any sort of work, I'm always reminding them to utilize gesture in that same regard, to try to unlock things that we're going after by just saying the terminology, right? It's a wonderful kinesthetic way, not just that all of a sudden the terminology is the only thing getting us there. That's not Estill, right? It's part of it. So yeah, I think that's wonderful.
How exciting.
Very cool. We have another question from the chat. Simone asks, have you played with the stereo field and voice qualities, as in like where the singers are standing and how the voice quality travels or is experienced? Like, how have either of you ever messed with things like that, putting specific voice parts using specific qualities in certain areas to play with the studio field in that way?
Well, out of necessity, just on stage placement when we're doing musical theater. Because if you have somebody way in the back, you up their twang number to 10 and say, I don't care if you think you sound really silly, that's what it is.
Absolutely. So true. So true.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of research in the choral world regarding kind of standing formation and how we can get voices of opposites, really. A heavier voice next to somebody who might benefit from that, for instance. And there's a lot of research within choral spacing terminology. And what I think is fascinating is if we're thinking about the way in which we're trying to get students to go after the same goals, they'll have slightly different, because of the way we're built, they'll have slightly different end results of the task. But if we're all going about it in a similar way, there's less and less need for some of the choral spacing things that are very typical. And, you know, somebody with more vibrato next to somebody with less vibrato, those types of things can kind of be resolved in some ways. But there are lots of things, like Simone's question. It still is helpful if sopranos and altos, so the treble voices, have more spacing between them no matter what we're doing because of where they are in their register and resonance abilities of hearing. Tenors and basses, lower voices like to be closer together, those types of things. If we have mixed formation, this is really exciting because you can match your ideals that you're going after next to your quartet in a whole different way than if we weren't going after similar goals of body cover or whatnot. So for mixed formation types of settings, it's a whole new approach when dealing with it from the structures themselves.
Wow, that's interesting. And yeah, Judith, just like you were saying, especially in the theater, we don't often get to pick where you stand, so you're going to have to choose your recipe based off of where they place you. Okay, let's see about other questions here. Okay, so traditionally, taking it a little more classic now, traditionally there has, in the schools of thought for classical singing, there's been a slight aversion to Estill, and I wonder if either of you have come up against that with like traditionally classic singers who have been quote unquote classically trained. When they come into Estill, have you experienced any aversion? And if so, like, was there like a good path that you found to bridging that gap?
Well, I find that the people that have experience in the classical that come to me are coming because they have a question. They have a problem. They're trying to solve it. And they're so relieved when we have a solution.
Right.
So the hardest thing that is still hard to get by is that there are still so many people, so many teachers that teach with a very hard squeezed abdominal wall. And, you know, just that's the hardest thing to get by, especially if they've done it for years. But basically, they're just relieved at having a solution. And so usually you got them.
Yeah. Easy. What about you, Ryan? Anything?
This is so near and dear to my interests. Because the student is who's important, right? And I think we get caught up on either side of any spectrum if it becomes about our ideals versus their ideals and what they want. So like Judith just said, they come with a question and we meet them where they are, and we don't judge their previous experience or their current contexts. And in the choral vocal worlds in particular, with this idea of classical, Western classical choral, for instance, or classical opera, if we think about that and juxtapose all the varying ideals of bel canto style, you know, there's a whole conversation there about trying to bridge the gap, as you said, in one of the articles that I wrote was the very topic of trying to bridge the gap between, we're all going after sustainability. We're all going after transfer of skill, no matter what. And many now are going after versatility, that our singers, no matter what they're coming to us with, need skills to be able to go out there. And Estill was my way into that, and is the way in that I know works, right? And the only thing that I've seen is students who come in with those questions, and then we help them unlock things, and we develop a terminology for doing so. But remember, we all know this, but for everybody watching too, that it's about seeing it visually. It's about feeling it kinesthetically. It's not just about applying the anatomy, words, and structures themselves, which I think sometimes gets Estill the rap that all we do is manipulate. And we're not manipulating, we're maneuvering. We're understanding, you know, things that I do right now with the choir this year after 4 years being here with this group is really about letting go of all the things that we think are necessary. So it's learning what is there to maneuver and then letting it go. Isn't that what free singing is about, right? And as we know, Estill is all about nothing is mastered until all extraneous tensions are released. So that's part, I think, of this question about what is the difference between dialogue that is misconstrued at times through the learning process by our students, and then folks that just don't know what is going on within the model itself. So that's kind of a short version of things that I've dealt with it.
Definitely. That's so interesting. Okay, my final question for the both of you. This has been absolutely amazing. I'm going to be thinking about this the rest of the day. I'm also going to be wishing that I had been in either one of your ensembles using the Estill hand signals. But when you both have taught at a higher level collegiately, did you find an aversion to bringing Estill into the curriculum? And if so, do you teach all the figures, all the qualities, or is it kind of like spotlight, here's what we need to know, here's the things that are going to be specific, and then more as they arise? Or do you think it's more baseline learning and then we go from there?
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay.
Well, basically the answer is yes. And you don't make a big deal that you're teaching Estill until people are starting to understand that it's working, and then you tell them what it is.
Okay.
What about you, Brian?
Yeah, and you know, we all have different stories of this, and it's just the sad reality of our reality, right? But I try to just keep an open dialogue, and I don't hide it anymore. If I ever did, it's more like, here's what we're gonna do, and these are our goals with this process, and this is the model we're using, and then I keep an open dialogue with all of the other faculty and try to collaborate through the process and help, because there are moments where, like, Carter will be in choir and he'll go to Judith and say, oh, we're working on retraction, and then do it, and then the teacher might go, oh cool, I don't know that, do that, and then it's not retraction, right? That's no one's fault. It's that we're all learning, and we have to keep in mind that's what can happen in these processes. But for the sake of, like, when you go to an Estill course, I think the first thing you want to do is go, oh my gosh, this opens my world. I want to do it all. And the only thing I've learned is don't do that, right? Pick your one thing that you're gonna do. And it might seem like it's so crazy to just do onsets and body cover for a whole 16 weeks, but realistically, that is so much more beneficial than just saying, now my warm-up process is all the figures, right? The whole EFP exam. I'd warn against that.
Yeah. Oh, how true. I was the same way. My first course, I was like, I want to do it all the time. That's the only one I want to think about. Hello, Luke.
Hello. Well, I'm here because I'm saying we have to end, but I want to thank Carter. I want to thank Brian. I want to thank Judith for being with us for this short moment of time. Estill voice training, we have seen again through this series, and we'll continue to see, is for everyone and is used in all different types of voice using. And that's one of the things that we wanted to showcase, especially with this series. And so it's just wonderful to see it in the choral and classical world. On top of that, we know that these experts do much more than choral and classical, because they are Estill experts. And especially in Estill voice training, we try to step away from the aesthetic bias and try to help people use their voice. So again, thank you so much for this. We will be back next month, and you will see it announced very soon with 2 new Estill experts for professional speaking voice. Thank you so much all for being here.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Carter. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you both.